Morning, Stephen.
Hello there. How are you, Michelle?
I'm good, thank you, except Sochi just started going a little nuts in my background here, so hopefully that won't be too
Well,
distracting.
I've got Falcor in my lap. He's not going nuts.
We're just a dog-loving family here.
Oh, yeah. So it's good to be back. Hopefully everybody's doing well who's on our show today, and we'll have lots of comments and ideas and questions. So we're going to do the usual form. I'm going to do a tip on PL SQL, get some really interesting conversations going. Then after that, we'll obviously do Q&A. I will share my favorite film, one of my favorite films this week, as opposed to a
Oh, we're
book.
doing film as
I'm
opposed
going
to
to do
book.
a film.
Okay, good.
And
All
just
right.
to show how non-sophisticated my taste is in most things. And then we'll take a look at a few organizations, and someone will pick a winner. So hopefully the people who joined us today saw the title that I put together for this talk.
Yeah, I was
People
I
with
was really perplexed by that title. I'm looking forward to hearing
me.
why you picked that. De-nuking.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, and then I'll obviously get into showing some code. So de-nuking. So nuking is atomic energy related stuff. And so atomic. So I'm sure everybody who works with Oracle database and relational databases in general is familiar with the idea of acid. And the A stands for atomicity. And what that means is that in SQL statements are generally speaking all or nothing. So if I say update the employees table set last name equal to upper last name, and there are 107 rows in employees table, as everybody knows, then either all 107 rows are updated, or if there any of those updates to a single row causes a problem and an error is kicked out by the SQL engine, the entire statement's impact is rolled back, right? So that's the atomic nature of SQL statements. And in general, I think that's a really good idea, and you don't want to mess with it, right? So generally speaking, any SQL statement you run is an all or nothing thing. But the question is, what happens when you don't want that situation, when you actually have a different scenario that you want to cover? So what I want to talk about is de-atomicizing or de-nuking your SQL statements. In other words, how can you get inside the execution of a single statement, which might be modifying multiple rows, and tell the SQL engine that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be some things. Some things are okay. So that's what I want to talk about today. And it all has to do with the log errors feature in SQL. So how about sharing my screen?
Well, I would, Stephen, except you have failed to share it to begin with. So I have nothing to share at the moment.
Okay. How's
There you
that?
go. Ready? Yeah. All right. Here we go.
All right. So what I did was go to Live SQL. I'm going to run the demo or show you the code out of Live SQL. So I went to Live SQL, and then I did a search. Come back to the main screen. And I did a search on log errors. And when you do this, you'll find the number of scripts here. And I'm going to talk about a couple of them today, but we'll go right into one of them for starters to talk about what the heck I'm talking about. So what I'm talking about, what I mean about de-nuking SQL statements, is being able to suppress errors at the row level inside the SQL engine, which is very different from other kinds of error suppression or continuing past exceptions that we might find in PL SQL. So let's take a look at how this might work and why. And to do that, I'll come back to a few of those steps in just a moment. We'll start right here with an all or nothing SQL statement. So we're going to publish a blog post that goes along with this talk. That'll be available later today. Go to insum.ca/Feuertip, and you can see all my past events and this one. So here's the story, and it's an interesting story, and it's a true story. Back in 2008, some of you may have remembered that capitalism died. That's what it did. It seized up and it died. The entire international financial system froze. Very, very bad situation caused essentially by unfettered, deregulated financial companies creating a housing bubble of extreme proportions. So the whole system collapsed. And the only solution that the financiers could come up with is to turn to us, the taxpayers, and say, make us whole, give us all your money, because we need to have the system up and running so you can have mortgages and bank accounts. And we said, okay. And then among keeping these companies alive, some of them failed. But what then happened is that early in 2019, the financial industry started handing out billions of dollars in bonuses, even more than the year before. It was like throwing salt on our wounds. So that's the context. So take a look at this code. So I've got the employees table. We just got our $25 billion from good old United States of America. and we want to give a bunch of it to our employees. So in fact, what we're going to do in this particular example here is give everybody or multiply everybody's salary by 200. So you're going to make a ton of money working for this company as long as it lasts. So it's very simple to write statements like that in SQL and PL SQL. I want to update the employees table and give everybody an enormous increase in salary or bonuses or whatever the case might be. So it's easy to write, but it can be hard to get these statements to complete. So in this little script that I put together here, I check to see how many people make more than $24,000, try to do this big fat update, take care of everybody in my company, and then see how many I've got when I'm done. And if anything goes wrong, show me what went wrong, and then show me how many people now have a big salary. And it turns out that in this case, before there was nobody making that much money, and afterwards there was nobody making that much money either, because at some point along the way of updating individual rows, one of those updates, by multiplying the salary by 200, increased the size of that number beyond the limits of the specified precision allowed for the column. Essentially,
so somebody's already making a ton of money.
That's right. Somebody was already making so much money that we couldn't fit their new number into the database. Now, of course, one solution would be go and modify the data model, expand the column. And that's one way you can do things. But what I want to do in this case is explore what to do when you run into this situation. So putting aside the morality of the context of this example, the bottom line is that in this case, we'd like to give this kind of salary increase to as many people as possible. That would be the answer to this is, okay, we're not going to change the column definition. Those people are making too much money already. They don't get the bonus. So I just want to give the bonus to all the people the number can fit in their column. Now, what we could do is switch from this kind of set orientation to row by row processing. So I could have a cursor for loop that gets all the employees, and for each individual row, I could update that one row with the salary. And then if I had a failure, if I got a negative 1438 failure, I could trap that inside the loop and then keep going. Mm-hmm. So that's how you can continue past an exception in PL SQL, a SQL exception. And I avoid the issue of atomic versus non-atomic, or I accept that SQL remains atomic by reducing the number of rows to one, updating just one row. So you can do that. And if you don't have too many employees, it might not take that long. But the bottom line is that, as I'm sure a lot of you know, doing that row by row DML processing is relatively slow. So I'd like to leave it in SQL if I could. And you can. So now let's talk about how to denuke your SQL. And Oracle Database provides a really cool way to do this. So I'm going to go back to that same body of code, and I'm going to make two changes. One is I'm going to get rid of the exception section. No exceptions at all. No exception handling at all. And the second thing is I'm going to add the log errors clause to my update statement. And what log error says is that if, as you're doing your updates, you encounter an error on a specific row, write the information about the error in the row out to another table, your error logging table, and then keep going. And what happened, there are a number of really interesting consequences to using log errors. One is that you avoid the all or nothing situation. I might update 900 out of 1,000 rows. Cool. So that answers what I needed to do. What also happens is that when this update finishes, even if errors had been encountered, the update statement does not terminate with an error. This, by the way, is a difference between log errors and save exceptions with for all, where if in save exceptions you hit at least one error, then when the for all statement completes, it will raise the negative 24 or 381 error or something like that. So in this case, log errors gets right into the SQL engine and says, hey, keep on going, we'll grab that information and save it. And when it's done, you have no way of knowing there was an error in and of itself. So that's a very interesting thing to keep in mind. Also, when you do the log errors, you can specify an optional tag. Essentially, you can tag some specific data added to the information. And also you can say how many errors you're willing to accept. Let's say I'm doing an update of 10,000 rows. And I know that if I get more than, say, 20 errors, something's badly wrong. There really shouldn't be hardly any errors, maybe one or two. So I could set the reject limit to 20. And then if it hits the 21st error, then the entire update statement will stop. So you have a number of different options with log errors. So that's the basic idea behind the denuking. Do we have any comments, questions that I should take before I continue?
Well, Stefan thinks it's very cool. He's never done that before. Brian is comparing it to the way Apex handles data loading.
Huh. Sure. So there are a number of scenarios where we find inside Apex, inside PL SQL, inside SQL, this ability to keep on going past the error. And in fact, there's some new features in SQL that even allows you to check on conversion. If I am converting a number string to a number, if I have a conversion, actually handle the failure in SQL, which is really cool. What's really powerful about this one is that it's deep inside the SQL engine. It's basically giving you a declarative way to tweak the underlying behavior in the SQL engine, which is very powerful, and also something to be very careful about. Now, let's go back up and take a little bit of a look at this error $sign table. Mm-hmm. So this is a relational table, nothing special about it. Generally speaking, the way that you create the table is by calling a package procedure. DBMS error log is the package for log errors. You pass it the name of the DML table, the one that you're having the actions on, and then it will create by default a table with error $_ in front of it. You can change all that if you want to. And then it creates a table with these 5 columns. So these are consistent across all error logging tables. And then for any column that can be implicitly converted to a varchar2, it will create a column of that name, and it will store the value that was in the row at that time when the error occurred. So if we go ahead and take a look at the execution of this block, now notice it says before there were 0 people making tons of money, afterwards 49. And the count in the table, 49 rows were modified. And then after the count in the table was 49. So just to show that that matched. So 2 things to notice. We updated 49 out of 107. So 58 didn't work. We'll have to check that and confirm that in a moment. But also, there was no exception, right? There was no error handling. No exception was raised. What you have to do if you decide to use log errors, what you have to do is look in the error logging table immediately after your DML statement and ask yourself, did anything go wrong? Otherwise, there'll be no way to know. And generally speaking, you'll want to know. So for example, I've got 58 rows in my error employees table. And if I take a look at that information, you can see that I've got the error number. Notice it doesn't store the negative, just a non-signed integer. There's the error information, the row ID for the row, and here's some of that information. So that's the column value. This is the tag that I put in there. And of course, in a more real world situation, you probably have different errors popping up, not the same one all the time. But there you go. So that's the basic idea. Take this data, take the data from the table when the error occurs, drop it into this error log table, and keep on going. And then afterwards, you check the table. So now I have a question for everybody on the call. And so let's see, general tip. Okay, Nils, hold on a second now. Don't answer all my questions in advance. Take a look at this error log table and ask yourself, if you were logging an error, what's missing? We've got the error number, the error message, the row ID, which is pretty cool. Just pulled a bug off of my arm. That was interesting.
Hope it wasn't a tick.
A tick on my knee this morning. Yeah, I got that too. The row ID, the operation type, update, insert, delete, and the tag. So what else might we want to see if we were logging errors? Can anybody think of anything? So Nils had one. When did it occur? Mm-hmm. Right? So the funny thing is about this approach with the error logging is that to me it rings of a situation I've seen pretty often over the years at Oracle, which is that somebody comes up with a really good idea, and this is a really good idea. When you need to break into that atomicity of SQL, this is a great way to do it. So they come up with a great idea, and they write up their functional specs, and they get it approved, and they work on it, and then they hit a deadline. It could be that they have to go to production because of other features. It could be that they just ran out of time, resources, whatever. Anyway, they get most of the way done, but not all the way done. And sometimes when Oracle, when the foundation software like Oracle Database, when those developers don't get it all the way done, there's not a lot you can do. You're just stuck with what they've got. And most of what they do is absolutely fantastic. Don't get me wrong. In this case, they kind of stopped before they should have, and they left out some really good stuff. So did anybody come up with a list of other ideas of what's missing? When did it occur?
What about the scope or where it occurred? So
where
the
did
name
it
of the
occur? Right? So
package.
where in my code was this statement? Yes, exactly. And what else? Anybody else? Any other ideas? Nils, you can chime in now if you want.
Permission to speak.
Permission granted. And at least the other one that I would say is, who did it?
Yeah.
Which schema was I running this from? Or, for example, in Apex, what would be the name of the user? And store that as well. So it's really missing a lot of really critical information. Just to make it really clear, right now, if I use this log errors table, and after I run my update statement, I do a select from the table, and let's say I iterate through the table and write it out to my permanent error log, for example, how would I know that these errors came from my statement and not somebody who's running a DML operation against the same table? So it's pretty tricky. And like I say, they didn't quite finish it up, but the good news is that you can finish it up yourself. So if you go to Live SQL, you'll see this helper package for log errors. This is a package I wrote, well, a few years ago. And the basic idea is that what it will do is allow you to do the dbms error log, create error log table. Wait a minute. Log errors, okay. No, there we go. Those other statements should not be there. Okay, so the basic idea is that instead of you calling dbms error log create error table, you call create objects. And what it will do is create the table for you. And this has all the same parameters that the built-in does. And then we'll also modify the table by adding additional columns, create a trigger to populate the columns, and also create a package to help you manage the data in that table. So it's a really interesting example of using dynamic DDL to generate code on the fly and also alter your table. And even if you want to do it, you can do this yourself instead of using mine. But the bottom line is that don't use the error log feature unless you're adding who created it, when it was created, where did it occur in my code, and maybe something else as well. So you can use log errors, you can use my helper package, and that will get you pretty far along with using this feature properly. One other thing you might run into, which is pretty interesting, you might have insert privileges on this table. So we've got a pretty standard setup where users log in under schema X, the user schema. The tables are in the data schema. And the user really has almost no direct access on the tables. Let's say they're allowed to insert into employees table. But then you create this error log table. Unless you also grant privileges on that error logging table to the schema that's doing the insert into the table as well, you can end up with a table of view does not exist error, which is really confusing when you look at your code. Remember, if I look inside my code here, there's no error dollar table in my application code. So if I just look at my code, this fails with, table of view does not exist. Well, employees certainly exist. What's going on? Very confusing. So you got to make sure that whoever's writing to the table also has privileges to write to the error logging table.
So Stephen, in this case, then it's going to log errors even if I don't explicitly say log errors? No,
sorry. Only if you say log errors.
Okay. All right. Sorry. I was looking here earlier.
You can have error logging. You can have the table created, but unless you use log errors, it will ignore it. It will not use it here.
Okay.
So you're not changing any characteristics of this table, only changing the behavior of SQL statements against the table. So that's it. That's how you avoid the all or nothing situation. Why don't you stop sharing my screen? Let's pull.
So there were a few comments and questions that came in.
Good.
Stefan wants to know, when are the log errors deleted? Do you have to explicitly delete them yourself, or do they get cleaned up?
So Stefan, this is all on you, the application developer. It is not half-baked, but certainly not complete as an actual developer utility. So yeah, you've got to do your cleanup, whether it's a job. To me, I think what I would do is when I'm using log errors, I would get the information in the table. I would have some way of detecting that these were my rows from this thing that just happened. I would do a cursor, use a for all statement, whatever, to push into my true permanent error logging table, and then remove them from the error log table. So the error log table is kind of a very transient scratch pad of information, not a persistent data set, though it is a persistent data set in Oracle. Brian is asking, what is the purpose of the $sign in the name of the error table? Well, very simply, what Oracle was trying to do is come up with a naming convention, a default naming convention, that they could most likely not end up creating a table with the same name as one of your tables. So error $_ seemed like a safe bet. So that's the only reason the $sign is there. It doesn't matter. In fact, you can name it whatever you want. So when you create the error logging table, you can specify an override name. This is all just the default. And of course, in the old days before 18C, I think it was 18C, right? Error $_ would be really problematic because you've got ERR $_. 5 characters out of 30. If I have a table name with 30 characters, obviously the default convention wouldn't work. But now, of course, we've got 128. You're unlikely to run into a problem that way.
Is there a specific database version for the log errors?
Log errors was added maybe in Oracle 9, certainly in anything that you're using today. No, right. It's all there. It's not a part of Enterprise Edition. It's just built into the SQL engine itself.
Ashish liked it.
Yeah, it's a really like that. And I do want to emphasize this. I hope that none of you will take this and say, as Ashish said, I like it. Let's go find all the places we can put in log errors, right? So in general, the all or nothing rule for a SQL statement is a very good rule. And it's something that you do want to follow, you need to follow. So when you're breaking away from this model of all or nothing, you should have a very clear reason why. And you should make sure that you're very firm about finding out what failed and then doing something with it. Or if it turns out you don't care if any of them failed, for example, you might be doing some big data load and anything that doesn't fit for whatever reason, you don't care about, it's junk. Okay, then I would say just put in a comment. If you have the log errors, reject limit unlimited, then after that statement in your code, put in a comment saying, by the way, I'm not checking the error log because I don't care. Otherwise, people who know about log errors will come in and say, oh, what are you doing? Oh my God. You're not even checking. So just make sure that whenever you have those kind of exceptional circumstances, you document them with a comment.
Niels isn't sure about adding all those additional fields to your error log table.
So Nils points out that instead of adding additional columns, you could just have a trigger that would basically populate the OR error tag field, or I guess we can put it in the error logging, the log errors into clause. Well, Nils, I think that's a good point, but certainly, let me put it this way. When you create a table yourself, instead of having created on, created by, if you're still using those standard audit columns, I know Connor McDonald suggests you don't, but if you're still using created on, created by, updated on, updated by, would you put those into a single string column, just mush them together with pipe delimiters? So I'd say the answer to that is no. And so the reason for doing the same thing with your error logging table is that you have clearly defined separate columns with that key information in it. Otherwise, you have to write queries that parse apart the string, and, so you can definitely do it. And I suppose what you could do is create a view on top of the error $ log table that breaks out those pieces into pseudo columns. So either way, what else? Looks like everything's okay. All right.
So I think we've covered it all.
Okay, good. So keep thinking about questions, comments, and what we'll do is kind of finish up with the soft elements, the non-coding elements. So what I'm going to do is show you my movie, one of my favorite movies of all time. Should I show the different groups first, though, or no? You're going to pick the person who's going to be
I think we should pick the person, and then they can think about which group they want to donate to as you present them.
Okay.
What do we think of that? Do you want to pick a person?
No, your job.
No. Niels, if you're still on, as Stephen's presenting our 3 groups, if you can have a think as to who you would like INSOM to donate $25 to this week, and then let us know once Stephen's done.
And now you'll share, right?
I will share.
So this week, I offer a few different groups. So the first is Bat Conservation International. Hopefully you all feel really good about bats. Bats are amazing creatures. They're mammals. Their wings look just like our hands. They're totally incredible creatures, and they're needed so badly on this planet, and they're in grave danger. So Bat Conservation International. Coral Reef Alliance. Wow. It makes me just about cry to think about what's happening to coral reefs, but we need to save all we can. So coral reefs. And Rainforest Trust. Without our rainforests, we are in really, really bad shape and danger. So we got to save our rainforests, save our bats, save our coral reefs, and Niels gets to pick which one of these 3 will survive into the future. It's a heady responsibility, Niels, but I think you can do it.
heavy
Yeah.
responsibility.
Okay, so while Neil's
well, I don't know if that he likes Batman, so I'm gonna assume he wants us to save the bats. Thank
great.
you, Neil.
Okay, so we'll make a donation to Bat Conservation International. Now, so I've talked about favorite books in the past, and I've had some science fiction, I've had some fantasy, kids' books, programming books. No, I didn't do programming quite. Timeless Way of
Nope.
Building. But I thought I would do a film. So in general, I got to say that I am not a sophisticate. So when it comes to food, for example, a bowl of oatmeal with some peanuts and cherry jelly mixed together, perfect dinner for me. I'm a very simple person in so many ways. And my tastes are also pretty foundational as well. So to me, The Fifth Element is one of the most perfect movies I've ever seen. If you haven't watched, I'm not going to give away too much, but I think you should check it out. It is both hilarious and deadly serious. To me, it combines all the best elements of fantastic science fiction movies. It's a space opera for sure. It's all about good versus evil in the most fundamental, biggest way, saving life in the universe. I mean, if you're going to watch fiction, if you're going to read a fiction book, why not go big? It's got Bruce Willis. Gary Oldman is a fantastic bad guy. Mila Jovovich is one of the most powerful weapons the universe has ever known. Really fantastic movie. And to me, it has one of the most important lines that I use in my life today, which is that time is not important, life is important. And what this film is all about is life is the most important thing. And think about it, folks, in the entire universe, and we're seeing a fair amount of it now, we're not finding any other examples of organic life yet. You can talk about how statistically it must be true that they're out there and they must be way more advanced than us. The bottom line is the only trees we know about, the only animals, the only sentience we know about is right here on this planet. We've got to stop killing so much of it. So check out The Fifth Element.
Brian agrees with you, by the way.
Oh,
I
cool.
think The Fifth Element was based on a book, right? And yes, you did. Glad to see you joining us today. And she says life is important indeed.
It's the most important thing because without it, well, it's just all really boring, I got to say. All really boring. Okay. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Stay safe, stay masked, get vaccinated if you haven't gotten vaccinated yet. And hopefully every week you come back to see us, the world will get just a little bit better, a little bit further back from the many different brinks that we have been on for the last several years. And I'll be back next week with another tip.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Bye.